Today's lesson is cacao, a plant from the gods. Hello, everybody. My name is Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're going to continue talking about cacao and its many uses. We did talk about the history of the cacao plant. It was originally grown in Mesoamerica, Central America there, and then later Cortez from Spain got some from Moctezuma II and took it back to Spain and the rest of Europe, but not before he wiped out the Aztec Empire.
Absolutely. It had been used by the Aztecs in ceremonial rituals and also enjoyed as a drink by nobles. But this wasn't the sort of sweet milk chocolate we think of when we think of your average chocolate bar. As we said, it was a drink. It wasn't even hot chocolate. It was actually bitter chocolate because the cacao seed, or the cacao bean, I should say, is naturally quite bitter. I don't know if it's quite as bitter as coffee, but it's much more in that area. So we would think that eating some cacao would be like, eating a nice sweet bean full of rich, sweet chocolate. That is entirely not the case. It was the Europeans who later on added the sugar, the milk, and the other things to make the chocolate that we know and love today. But the cacao plant for 4,000 years was important to the Aztec people there in Mesoamerica before the Spanish came along.
Right, so we basically talked about the way the Aztecs enjoyed cacao beans, or cacao in general, and we also talked about the fact that the Europeans made it into chocolate as well. But as promised, we're going to talk some more today about some other uses of the cacao plant. It's not just used in chocolate. We'll find out some of the other uses right now, so let's get into it. Let's listen to the first part, and then we'll come back to discuss it.
Besides providing the key ingredient for chocolate, cacao plants have plenty of other uses. Dried, fermented seeds can be cut into tiny pieces to make cacao nibs, which can be enjoyed on their own or added to baked goods and smoothies. Cacao powder, fermented cacao seeds ground into a powder, is also used in baking. And the fat derived from the seeds, known as cacao butter, is a substance that is found in many beauty products. These cacao products are all high in antioxidants, which protect the body from damage and disease.
大家好，第一部分我们看到形容词 fermented 表示发酵过的。举例来说 ，The drink was made from fermented apples。这种饮料是用发酵苹果制成的。另外，我们来补充这个字的动词 ferment，F-E-R-M-E-N-T， ferment 指使发酵。例如 Lucy let the homemade wine ferment for several weeks before bottling it. Lucy 让自制的葡萄酒发酵好几周后才把它装瓶。再来，我们看到名词 smoothie 指冰沙或是果昔。例如 Can you make me a smoothie? 你能做一杯果昔给我喝吗？接着我们看到动词 derive， 意思是取得、得到或是起源于。我们可以说 Sally derives great pleasure from playing the piano. 弹钢琴能让 Sally 得到极大乐趣。又或者说 Wanda wears perfume derived from flowers. Wanda 喷了从花萃取制成的香水。
Okay, so again, we did talk about chocolate. So here it says, besides providing the key ingredient for chocolate, cacao plants have plenty of other uses. So here's that pattern here. Besides something, or in addition to providing the key ingredient for chocolate, these plants also have other uses, okay? So yes, indeed, they not only have this one use in chocolate, but again, they can be used in lots of other ways.
That's right. Dried fermented seeds can be cut into tiny pieces to make cacao nibs, which can be enjoyed on their own or added to baked goods and smoothies. This is news to me. I'd never heard of anything like this. So you can actually take the seeds, dry them, so leave them out in the sun, kind of, or maybe roast them like they do with coffee, right? Coffee beans are actually dried out coffee seeds, and then you actually will ferment them a little bit. When we think of fermentation, fermenting something, we kind of think of wrapping it up maybe and letting it rot a little bit. Like Korean kimchi is a type of fermented cabbage, or cheese is also fermented. You take sort of raw milk and let it go sour a little bit, let it spoil a little bit, but by doing that, you're actually creating a chemical reaction, sort of changing the flavor. In many cases, changing the flavor into something better or different, or certainly just as delicious. So then you dry out your seeds, you ferment your cacao seeds, and then you cut them into tiny pieces to make these little nibs. And nibs, I guess, of cacao that can be enjoyed on their own. So you might eat them like a crunchy snack or something like that. Add them to baked goods and also to smoothies. So if you're a healthy person, you might start your day, or even a person with a busy schedule, a smoothie is a good way to start your day, or a good drink to have after a workout. Basically, you're taking yogurt or something creamy like that, and you're throwing in basically any kind of fruit you can imagine. So people often put bananas in their smoothies. They could make vegetable smoothies. You might throw in some ice to cool it down. So it's kind of like a thick, healthy milkshake, something like that with cacao nibs. I'd love to try it. I have no idea what that would taste like.
It does certainly sound yummy. And again, these seeds have to be fermented first. And as Mike said, they go through some kind of chemical process. Here in Taiwan, of course, I think of chou tofu, stinky tofu,
yes,
as being fermented. And they also talk about fermentation in regard to tea. Like a black tea is fully fermented, oolong tea is only half fermented, and green tea is raw, or it's not fermented at all. Now, cacao powder, fermented cacao seeds ground into a powder, is also used in baking. So, yeah, powder, of course, is what you get when you grind something into a very fine form of those things. So, yes, coffee is ground down. I wouldn't call it a powder, though. Those are more like coffee grounds. But other things can be ground into a powder, like flour. You take grain, like wheat or whatever, and you grind it down, and then you get a powder.
Exactly right. So there you go. And that's not all. The fat derived from the seeds, known as cacao butter, is a substance that is found in many beauty products. So there you go. You can actually squeeze the oil out of the seeds like they do with, soybean or sesame or something like that. You can squeeze the oil out of many of the seeds, and then you can get yourself some cacao butter. Butter, of course, being sort of like a solid version of milk fat. Margarine is a solid version of some type of vegetable fat. So you can melt this down, this butter, make it into cacao oil, use it in lots of healthy things, and many beauty products as well. I guess skin creams or something like that. Moisturizing creams for your dry hands. They might have cacao butter in them as well. And it says the fat is derived from the seeds. When something is derived from, basically it comes from that thing, probably through some kind of process that changes it or allows this to happen, allows you to extract something or take something out of another thing. But basically, through the process, cacao butter comes from cacao seeds. And these cacao products, like the ones we've been hearing about, the nibs, the powder, the butter, these cacao products are all high in antioxidants, which protect the body from damage and disease. So now we're thinking healthy, healthy, healthy. If something is high in something, we're talking about an amount, a value, a percentage, something like that. We often use this expression when talking about healthy fruit and vegetable. Apples or oranges, I should say, are high in vitamin C. Spinach is high in iron, I believe, and vitamin D. So they're good sources. You can get a lot out of that thing from natural sources if you can.
Yeah, antioxidants, I think, go after those free radicals in your body.
Okay.
And those things cause trouble. So if you have antioxidants in your diet, they can stop those things. And you get them from, say, vitamin C, beta-carotene, and vitamin E and stuff like that. Those are considered the antioxidants. And yes, indeed, the cacao products are high in antioxidants, and they can protect your body from damage and disease. So indeed, get your hands on some of those cacao nibs, chew on them, and you'll be nice and healthy. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our explanation. Let's move on now to the second part.
Until recently, waste produced from cacao plants was simply thrown away. But Ivory Coast, the world's largest exporter of cacao, has invented a method to turn that waste into a source of renewable energy. Cacao seed shells, pod husks, and other waste items will be burned and used to produce electricity for entire communities in cacao growing areas in Africa.
第二部分我们看到单字 exporter， 这个字是名词，指输出国或是出口商，像是 Germany is one of the major exporter of cars， 德国是车子的主要输出国之一。另外这个字如果去掉字尾 er， 就会变成动词 export， 指出口或是外销。举例来说， Taiwan exports computer parts to the US， 台湾出口电脑零件到美国。除了上面的意思， export 也可以当名词，指输出品或是出口物。例如 Computer parts and fruit are some of Taiwan's exports， 电脑零件和水果都是台湾的出口产品。接着我们看到形容词 renewable， 意思是可再生的或是可更新的。我们可以说 Many countries are searching for renewable energy， 许多国家正在寻找可再生能源。或是Wood has the benefit of being a renewable resource， 木材的优势是它属于可再生资源。再来我们看到名词 community， 指社区或是群体。例如 Heather grew up in a small farming community in southern Canada， Heather 在加拿大南部一个小小的农业社区里长大。或是 Jordan belongs to a group that helps make the community safer to live in， Jordan 隶属于一个帮助社区居民更安全的团体。
Okay, here we go with the second part of our lesson. Let's continue to talk about some of the other uses of the cacao plant. Until recently, waste produced from cacao plants was simply thrown away. So, yes, that happened until recently. For a long time, you got a lot of waste produced from those cacao plants, okay? You got the chocolate beans or whatever, you got the nibs, and you've made your products, but then you've got all this leftover stuff, maybe the stems of the plants, the leaves and stuff. You don't want that stuff, it's kind of useless, so you just throw it away. That does seem kind of wasteful.
Absolutely. But Ivory Coast, the world's largest exporter of cacao, has invented a method to turn that waste into a source of renewable energy. So there you go. Another great story about how companies and industries that have been around for a long time are still innovating, still changing, and in many cases finding a way to turn their waste, to turn things that they used to throw in the garbage or just throw away, to turn that waste into a source of renewable energy. So this is happening in the Ivory Coast, or Côte d'Ivoire, as it's often called with a French name, a country there in West Africa, very close to Nigeria and Ghana, that part of the world. And then the Ivory Coast actually is the world's largest exporter of cacao. Yeah, as we learned yesterday, cacao originally is from Central America, but now it's grown in large amounts in that area of West Africa. And an exporter of something is a country or possibly a business that exports a thing from their country to other countries around the world. When you export something, you send it away. You make it here and you sell it somewhere else in another country, somewhere overseas. Taiwan, of course, is an exporter of pineapples and bananas and microchips. These are things that we make here. We use them here, of course. There is a local market, but much of the money for that industry, for that business, comes from selling it overseas or exporting it. We can also use export as a verb. So they're growing the cacao in Ivory Coast. Big chocolate companies around the world are buying it up, and it's being put on boats and sent off. It's being exported all over the place. But they're trying to turn the waste from all this farming, just bits of the plant that they don't use in the chocolate process. They're trying to find a way to turn it into a source of renewable energy, a way of making energy, making power, burning it to create electricity, that type of thing. And since it's grown, since it's something that they grow and they will continue to grow, and they won't run out of it like trying to dig up oil or find coal underground, it will always be there. It will renew or sort of remake itself. That's why we describe it as renewable. Renewable energy is energy that will always be there. So the power of the sun, the power of the wind, the power of the waves, and things that we create naturally without making a lot of other pollution.
Exactly. So, yes, we've got finite resources, as you said, petroleum and coal. They will run out someday. But supposedly, we can use solar power and wind power for a long time. Those are sources of renewable energy, as is the waste produced from the cacao plant before it gets thrown away. And here are some examples of how they're using this as renewable fuel. Cacao seed shells, pod husks, and other waste items will be burned and used to produce electricity for entire communities in cacao growing areas in Africa. So these are various parts of the cacao plant here. You've got the seed shells. The seeds are inside shells, and you need to bring them out of the shells, like peanuts, of course. You take the peanuts out of the shells. And then you've got pod husks. A pod holds several seeds in a row, and so you've got the husks there that's left over the outside of the pod. And then again, you've got other waste items, maybe like the stems or the leaves, or maybe even the roots.
That's right. All right, we're going to learn more about that after we talk about these words, electricity and communities. Electricity, of course, is something we use to make energy, or we use it as a form of energy. I should say when you plug anything into the wall that needs power, you are probably powering that thing with electricity. Everything from the battery in your phone makes electricity to power stations, of course, that create it and send it all over the country to light up our lights, turn on our televisions, power our machines, and in many cases, power our cars these days, right? Electric cars run on electricity, not the gasoline-powered and gasoline-burning cars that we were more used to in the past. And when we talk about a community, this is just a group of people who live in an area together. A town, a village is a small community. Towns bigger. Cities can be really huge communities with neighborhoods and smaller communities inside them. So basically, we're saying here that they're going to use waste from cacao farming to burn it in power stations. That will make the electricity, and then through the wires, they'll send that out to towns and villages and cities all across West Africa and beyond. So there you go. As long as people keep eating chocolate, people in West Africa will be able to turn on their lights. I think that's a pretty good deal.
Sounds like it's a pretty inventive idea.
Have a chocolate bar for the people of West Africa.
Indeed. And, of course, it sounds very environmentally friendly. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson. Let's move on now to the third part and wrap things up.
Today, climate change is making it harder to grow cacao. But finding more uses for cacao waste products could provide farmers with greater incentives to grow this special crop, thus feeding the world's appetite for its useful and delicious products.
最后第三部分我们看到名词 incentive 指激励、刺激或是鼓励。举例来说 Some parents offer their children money as an incentive to study their lessons. 有些家长给他们的小孩零用钱当作念书的奖励。
Okay, so here's the final paragraph in today's lesson. It says, today, climate change is making it harder to grow cacao. Yes, we always hear about climate change, and it seems to always be causing problems. And here, of course, is causing problems with the cacao plant. It's more difficult to grow the cacao plant because of climate change.
I guess hotter temperatures, lower temperatures, less rain, too much rain. All of this is affecting the areas that we grow cacao in. So that, of course, is always going to be a problem with climate change, no matter where we're talking about in the world. But finding more uses for cacao waste, specifically in West Africa, but finding more uses for cacao waste products could provide farmers with greater incentives to grow this special crop, thus feeding the world's appetite for its useful and delicious products. That's absolutely right. The more we can do with the cacao plant, everything from using the beans in the traditional chocolate making industry to using its waste as a form of renewable energy or renewable resource to create energy, all of these things will provide farmers with greater incentive. An incentive is basically a reason to do something, a motivation to do something. Why do you go to work? Well, because you get paid at the end of the week or at the end of the month. That's your incentive. If you want someone to do something, you give them an incentive, a reason to do it. You know, if you want your kids to clean their room, maybe you say, I'll buy you a delicious cacao chocolate bar if you clean up your room or something like that. You're trying to get them to do something, and then you're giving them a reason, a reward, some form of pay, whatever that is, to go and do it. So the more we can do with the cacao plant, the more reason there will be, the more motivation there will be for farmers to grow this special crop. Thus, or thereby, or through that, they will also be feeding the world's appetite for its useful and delicious products.
Indeed, so we can continue to have chocolate to eat, and we can have cacao butter in our beauty products, and we can thank all the farmers in Africa for our beautiful skin. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Let's listen now to our Chinese teacher, Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文一开始写到，可可树除了为巧克力提供最重要的原料外，它还有多种用途。好，那文中用到 besides 来表达除了什么什么之外还有什么什么。那我们来学习它的不同词性以及用法。好，第一种 besides 可以当介系词，后面是接名词或动名词来表达除了什么什么之外还怎么样，那么意思就相当于 in addition to。 像课文句子它就是用这个用法哦，它用 besides providing 怎么样怎么样来表达说除了提供什么之外还怎么样。我们来造个例句， Kate can speak other languages besides English. 除了英语之外 Kate 还会说其他语言。好，那这边补充一下，如果 besides 是接在否定字词，像是 no, nobody, nothing 等等的后面，这时候它的意思就会跟 except 或者是 except for 一样，是用来表达除了什么之外就没有什么什么了。举例来说， There was nobody there besides me. 除了我之外，没有任何人在那里。好，那第二个用法我们可以用 besides 当副词，那这时候它常常摆在句首，用来修饰整个句子，表达说除此之外，而且怎么样怎么样。例如 The show was fantastic. Besides, the tickets didn't cost much. 那场表演很精彩，而且门票也不贵。接着读到课文第一部分的最后一句，他说These cacao products are all high in antioxidants. 这些可可产品都富含抗氧化剂。好，我们常常会用 be high in something 或是 be rich in something 来表达富含什么或是什么什么的含量很高。相对的 be low in something 就是指什么的含量很低。举例来说Most vegetables are high in fiber. 大部分的蔬菜都富含纤维质。至于 antioxidant 这个字，它是指抗氧化剂。那我们来学它的字首字根。看到 anti 这个字首，可能念作 anti 或是 anti， 它表示反抗、反对的意思。那常常会接在形容词或是名词的前面。在 antioxidant 这个字当中，anti 表示对抗，那么字根 oxide 这部分表示氧化物，后面再加上名词字尾 ant 表示促进什么什么作用者，合在一起 antioxidant 就表示抗氧化物、抗氧化剂。好，顺便补充几个有相同字首的单字。第一个是antibacterial， 它是拼作 antibacterial。好，那它的字首 anti 表示反抗、反对。那么 bacterial 是形容词，形容细菌的，细菌引起的，合在一起 antibacterial 它就是形容抗菌的。第二个补充的是 antibody， 好，它是拼作 antibody，body 是身体嘛，那么 antibody 就是指抗体。第三个是 antivirus， 那么 virus 是病毒， antivirus 就是防毒、防电脑病毒的意思咯。而第四个 antibiotic， 它是拼作 antibiotic，anti 表示对抗，那么字根 bio 表示生命， tic 它可以是形容词字尾或者是名词字尾，把它合在一起。antibiotic 当名词就是指抗生素，那么当形容词就是形容抗生的、抗菌作用的。好，以上是今天的重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Grind. Coffee beans must be ground before they can be used to make coffee. Derive. Butter is derived from milk fat and can be made by beating cream or milk. Electricity. Turn off the lights when you leave the house or you'll waste electricity. Community. The entire community gathered to protest against police violence. Incentive. Mr. Garrison offered his employees more money as an incentive.
Discussion starter starts now!
It's time now for our discussion starter. The question is, what did you find most interesting about cacao's history or uses, and why?
Well, I should probably say something about how it can be used as a renewable resource and all that stuff. That is great, but really it's those cacao nibs. I've never heard of cacao nibs, these little fermented and dried out bits of the seed or the bean. Use them in smoothies, put them in baking products. I've never heard of them. I'd love to try them. So I'm kind of stuck on the nibs.
Does sound kind of interesting there. But I never knew that chocolate or cacao was only consumed by nobles of the Aztec Empire. I thought everybody consumed it. I thought it grew everywhere, so kings and queens and farmers alike could all enjoy it, but that wasn't the case.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.